the same way as looking at agriculture. Look at what we've done. We've made everything our enemy. Everything's a pest or a disease or an invasive thing, and we have that, and we set it up for ourselves because that's the kind of competition we like to be in. We're in competition with the planet. The beauty of something like that, though, again, is that real competition would mean that we are together agreeing on something, which we're not.
Right.
We're not really.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Jack Algiere, a talented organic farmer who manages the growing operations at the Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture in New York's Hudson Valley. Stone Barns is a special place, not just for its beautiful farm and grounds, which are open to the public, but also for being the home of Blue Hill, an amazing restaurant run by Chef Dan Barber, who has a magical way of making vegetables the star of every dish.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm talking today with Jack Algiere. Jack.
Hi, Dave. Great to see you.
It is great. I've been wandering around Stone Barns Center for the last day, and I'm just kind of blown away by what you're doing here. And the, I'd say, profound level of education that's going on has really grown since I was here years ago. I mean, it's just, you're doing so much. It's very impressive. Before we talk about that, give me a little bit of history of how you came here.
Well, I came here through the farm. I came here from, originally, I grew up in Rhode Island on a small farm with my family, and had worked a lot through different farms and nurseries and things like that, and ended up going to school for plant science. Parallel to going to school at URI for horticulture and plant science work, I was also working biodynamic farming at Meadowbrook Herb Gardens with Heinz Grotke.
Heinz. Oh, I didn't know that. And Davey worked there too.
Oh,
Davey
yeah.
Miskell.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was a great teacher of his, Heinz.
Well, he was an incredible fox. A brilliant man. And I learned so much from him that I still, in many ways, Shannon and I both worked there together. And lived above the herb drying barn, and really, in some ways, it was, I can't say how valuable that was, because it was putting in this juxtaposition, this kind of play between all of the science and technology and everything that I was learning at school. Largely, I was going to school to try to figure out why we had ended up in this situation where everybody was like, it's all good, but like, that's how you used to farm. The organic way is really how you used to farm. And if you want to be successful in the future, you need to follow this new set of rules that are out there in the world for industry. And I just have a hard time swallowing that. And I also have a tendency to go into the problem set rather than try to go around it. And found myself studying it and really working hard in the university. I worked for the botany department and redesigned the greenhouse at the botany department under Chris Nerone, and did a lot of organic research in there. A lot of my friends from the plant science department would come and do their trials and things like that in that space. And
give me an idea of what years you were in college.
Early 90s, 94, 95.
So organic was arriving. There were organic farmers around.
There was an organic label. It's like back, I was going to school when the orange organic sticker was around, which was pretty early on in terms of labeling that stuff. There was that orange sort of oblong sticker.
Before USDA, right?
well before USDA.
Yeah.
Although there was NOFA, certainly all the NOFA chapters were around, and there was a lot happening. And so it was very interesting to me, but at the same time in Rhode Island, like, there was some great farms, the Murners, and there was a lot of organic farms that were happening in Rhode Island, small. But by and large, the farm communities were dissolving. All the dairies, all the family farms that were in my area, in southern Rhode Island, were turning into housing developments. And so I was just so curious to know why. In many ways, as any good 18 or 19-year-old can be, there you start to realize that you've been betrayed a little bit by the amount of information that you've received about, especially about the food system, but about a lot of other things in the world. And so it was an exciting moment for me. I couldn't get enough. I couldn't capture enough information. And I had this thought in my mind that there was actually this great potential for spiritual connection ongoing at agriculture in relationship to land, and that being a farmer could actually be something really good for the land and for our communities, and not something that was toxic for us and everybody. I mean, I was around a lot of people that got serious illness and died from chemical exposures, and I saw that happen. And these are the same people that knew about organic methods, but had pretty well, let that go for the sake of them trying to stay in business.
So they felt the market just wasn't there. They couldn't make a living. They were getting pushed towards more chemical, more industrial paths.
Yeah, the loyalty wasn't there. The community loyalty wasn't there to support the methodology, those complex things, like the whole processes, the starting things from seed and growing things in the field. It just kept getting cut back to nursery style, like limiting your product lines, limiting your the enterprises that one small farm had. But there are certainly CSAs, and our food co-op in Kingston was strong and vibrant and growing still. There was a lot of people there was still that community, that organic community at its core. But I could never figure out why it was so splintered from the rest of the mainstream. And also just what it was to be a farmer in that. It was still like really new to me to understand, like, who was this farmer? And how could I become that in some ways, So we finished school, and Shannon and I, in 99, 98, 99, moved west because we, at the time, Meadowbrook Herb Garden was sold and ended up being bought and turned into kind of a pumpkin patch, which is just extremely sad. 35 years of dry farmed biodynamic herbs, and that ended. And so we went west, and with this kind of prospect, this, like, we've heard that it's happening out there, and there's a lot of it, so let's go there. Really find somebody, get involved, get into the program. So we went to first to Colorado, and we found a place in Boulder to work we went to the farmer's market and went to the best looking stand that we could see, which was Gem of the Field, Dan Mates, who's still out there doing EcoCycle. We went to him and said, "Hey, got a job? You need some help?" And he said, "I just lost 2 people yesterday. How about, you jump on with us?" And so we worked there in the foothills north of Boulder for a year or so. And then I moved to California. And very serendipitously looking for some stuff to do to get engaged. I got engaged in the Ecological Farming Association, the Eco Farm, started volunteering, and met Kalita Todd. And Kalita had me work for her to help source and collect all the different products from all the organic farmers and food businesses and distributions that gave to Feed Eco Farm Conference for those 5 days at Asilomar. And in those in that moment of meeting her, I met her husband, Amigo Bob.
Yeah.
And Amigo and I became immediate friends, and who deeply admired him and worked very closely with Amigo then for the next several years. On the road with him, doing some consulting, helping to establish his farm in the Sierras, and managing some of the olive orchards for his Aeolia project, which was restoring old heritage orchards that were around the foothills of the Sierras, and doing pressing and olive making and that sort of thing. So after 9/11, we decided to move back to the East Coast to be closer to our family, which was a decision mostly based on just missing our family in a moment of serious stress, disturbance, social disturbance, and that sort of thing. So we just wanted to be closer. And that was really a hard move. It was a hard decision to leave working with Amigo, because he was such a great teacher and such an incredible mentor and friend. And but inevitably, our love and decision to be closer to our family moved us back. We helped some old friends that we had worked with at Meadowbrook help start a farm in Lyme, Connecticut, that was an estate, Whitegate Farm, and turned that estate into a working CSA with their family, which is still running today. Wonderful, beautiful farm. We were there for a couple of years all together to try to get it up on its feet and get the CSA running and really production there. And, in that time, I still stayed really close. I was going back and forth to California quite a bit with the Eco Farm Conference, and still helping and supporting that, and staying really connected with Amigo. And one day he said, I was just at this event with Elliot Coleman, and we were talking about this place in New York that is developing, this Stone Barns place by the Hudson, and we both thought, you should do this. You're the guy for this. You really got to check this place out. And I was like, well, I'm kind of happy where I am. We've done this thing, and the community that's there is really great, and it's Westchester County. Like, what could this be? I was thinking like New York City, kind of, I guess. And, so we, through a series of different communications and things like that, ended up coming to this place to really check it out. And to see these huge open savanna pastures with these grand oaks and red tails flying everywhere, and just this incredible, gorgeous, protected piece of landscape. And I thought, well, this is beautiful. So, like, what's actually happening here? What is really happening? What is the potential of this place? And the more I learned about it, we met a series of people that had been involved in the initial start of Stone Barns. I met Dan and David Barber and Maureen, and got a sense of Dan's thinking in terms of cooking. And this was all, pre-construction of Stone Barns. And, right away, my first meeting with Dan was that Shannon and I took the train out to the city, to go to Blue Hill in the city and Washington Square, and brought him this basket of produce, these beautiful Haircoat Verets, and this nice tight little watermelon, and some purple Peruvian potatoes, and a few different things that we felt were pretty sweet, nice, really nice quality, to show off what kind of stuff we were doing, and give him a little bit of that. And went into that basement restaurant, which is just a wonderful place still, and handed him this basket of product, and he sat us down outside, and every course that came to us, the beans were on this hake, and the watermelon was cut and seared in this tomato salad, and everything we gave him, he brought to us. And I thought, this is my guy, this is my guy. And so that's, nearly 20 years that we've been working together on that kind of call and response back and forth. And I'd never worked really with a chef that was that had that kind of response. It was, in some ways really modest and respectful, but also extremely, he just showed off his skills in a way that was just really brilliant. And so that began what we were really going to do. And I think both of us, when we built the greenhouses here, and we're working closer with Elliot and Barbara, and in terms of design and handing that off, and me taking on the design of this farm system, which has grown a little bit. Well, I'll tell you a little bit how that's grown. But when we started, we were 88 acres of this nonprofit inside what is a 1,500 acre park preserve. And this little core of the stone barns, 49,000 square foot stone barn built in the 30s, that was fully restored to be an education space and restaurant for Blue Hill. We also took what was a livestock operation, a Simmental breeding operation, and turned that into a highly diversified farm system. Originally with about 4 acres of organic vegetables, a half acre of greenhouse space, some tunnels, and the beginning of what would be a living landscape. Lots of agroforestry and fruit production, no spray fruit production, that sort of thing. That's now grown to about 12 acres of organic vegetables, still the half acre greenhouse, and what is effectively about 500 acres of open pasture and lay rotation systems for cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, chickens.
So as a nonprofit, what is the mission for Stone Barns?
So the mission is pretty simple at its core, which is just to connect people to food and agriculture, to find a direct connection between food, agriculture, and health. The mission statement has changed over the years, but the concept has always been the same, and started from this really simple place of people are not connected enough to their food system, and the hypothesis is that the farther we are away from it, the harder it is for us to make clear decisions, and for us to actually have the kind of confidence to be good food citizens, and for us to actually make good ecological and social decisions, because food is at the center of our society. And we just wanted to be able to have a place that we could show others that. And we started with children. We started even with my own children. We started with camps and family activities. And when the campus was still fairly small, we were doing lots of egg collections. And, we were trying to not, and I think we were very successful at this, not being a zoo or a botanical garden or a museum. And what we were was really kind of hard for people to wrap their head around because, well, maybe not for a lot of the farmers that might be listening to this. When you invite your community to the farm, there's this incredible grounding relationship in the realness and the modernness of the presence of being on a farm, which not nearly enough people get a chance to experience. And that's why it's a little bit confusing to name it, because it's not historic Williamsburg, and it's not the Met, and it's not a zoo, but there's something about the connectivity to it. So the more we did this, the more people came to this place. It's obviously a beautiful place, so it's a draw. We're right 30 minutes north of Manhattan, so we have more than enough of a capacity to get people to come to this place and see it. And in my mind, really early on, I felt like there was just way too many people here. And I think that's about capacity of a landscape and what makes a landscape healthy. Nonetheless, we're a mission-based organization and a place-based organization. So it's in our value set and in our responsibility to use the place to teach, which is a great challenge in many ways to have. How do you create an experience that is personal and authentic enough for the right number of people so they're not just mobbed around each other and get a lesser experience?
Right.
On a fall day like this, you could have there could be thousands of people here on a weekend day. And that's a beautiful thing, but it also really is hard to grasp what's happening. When those numbers are a little bit smaller, actually people can eat together, they can interact with the farm in a closer way, they can speak to the farmers, they can speak to the chefs, they can engage in the eating and farming in a way that is more personal and is much more meaningful. And so we've always had a member base that has been here that supports us, because the other component of this is that we want people to come back, return to this place regularly, and make it part of their own, be part of the sort of commitment to this place is by staying with it, which is, ultimately what I think happens with all farms, is that we rely on the loyalty and commitment of our community. So if it's just a field trip, it's a great moment, and it may have turned a light bulb on. So I would never take away from those moments in which I've seen so many young people and families and adults alike have seen that light bulb go off when they realize, what they haven't been looking at, what they haven't seen in the food system that gets them excited and maybe takes them that next step. But that's just a snapshot. So you really kind of have to have that reconnection, re-engagement. And over the years, again, we've done camps and weekend programs and cooking classes and professional events, entrepreneur intensives and fellowships and apprentice programming. We've had hundreds of apprentices that have come through Stone Barns over the years and studied in the greenhouse and in the fields and with our livestock team. And always, in some ways, it's bittersweet because you lose these great people, but they go out to do wonderful things. And so, like any good natural system, in time it matures, and you all of a sudden realize what you have. And what we've found is, which I think is probably the single most valuable thing that this organization has been able to do, is that we've maintained these long-term dialogues between the kitchen and the farm and our membership, and now a lot more research and experimentation between each other, because we allowed each other to take tremendous amounts of risks together, back and forth, not without lots of challenge, but always with commitment. And that was the big thing, is that we were able to keep our game really high. That's like such a huge privilege, to be able to have this microenvironment where we can do that. Like we have, at one time or another, right now we have about 130 staff between kitchens and offices and farms, and the activities that are happening here. It's a working community.
Yeah. It's interesting. You're suggesting, I never thought of this before, that a kind of incredibly precious part of real community is commitment. That you need to have the group commit to the mission and to each other, and then something else happens.
You have to have that commitment. It's the same way that, like, the community is required to be committed. The same way, like, you want your chef to be like, yeah, I'll take whatever you want. But also the same thing goes back. You could say, there's always this kind of conversation among farmers and chefs where it's like, well, as a chef, you might say, well, I don't dictate what the farmer grows. And the farmer might say, well, I don't really dictate what the chef cooks. Well, at first you have to.
Yeah.
I need this. This is what I've got. That happens. I just grew like 1,000 lettuces for you, and you only have like 10 tables. So good luck. You can't navigate. That takes time to balance out. But once it's up there, you can't tell where one starts and the other begins. The creative process is fed and perpetuates. Roughly 8-9 years maybe it takes. I don't even know. I couldn't put a finger on it, but it doesn't take 1 or 2 years. It takes a long time. it takes a lot of shedding of people. Like, we've been able to maintain this height with hundreds of farmers, hundreds, maybe thousands of chefs that have come through this place over the almost 20 years we've been doing this. And nonetheless, the more we look at it, regardless of we've seen some of these great people come and go, the pattern keeps showing itself. And, we all learn through observation, and in order for us to dispel any doubt that we can trust each other in this, it takes a lot of repetition and a lot of pattern and a lot of time, especially if you're asking us to be, committing to something like a 7-year rotation or a 10-year rotation. Who gets to see a 7-year rotation run through its course? Well, farmers do. Hopefully the rest of their community does. You can talk all day about how rotations are long and ecologically minded and polycultural and interactive and contributive, but until you see it again, and then you see it again, you can create. That's how the cuisine then follows that.
I visited a farm last week. He was the 5th generation of his family who were dairy farmers in that region, and 4 generations on that farm. And his sons have taken it over, and he's looking to the day, perhaps, if they can survive as a unit, when his grandchildren will take over. They'll be the 7th generation, which had a resonance to it, didn't it? And to think of that kind of a long relationship with a particular place. And so what you do doesn't need to have a 1-year payback. It could have a 20-year payback, although still the farm has to survive for those 20 years. That we have to find a way that we can, as a community, support the farms that we want to support, that we want to have be there for our children.
And that gets to, the idea of that just kind of gets to this other part of what we do as an organization, and a realization that I had some years into the nonprofit of this place. Like, what is the agricultural aspect of this nonprofit? Because of course, at heart, I want the place to be productive, of course. Like, I want the plants to be healthy. I want the animals to be healthy. I want everything to be delicious. This coming off, and I wanted it to be valued by my community at the best value that it could be, to support the work that we're doing. I want my team to be paid well. I want our systems to be able to be maintained at this certain level that costs, that takes time, that takes money. If it doesn't take product, it certainly takes time. Yeah. And that's part of developing something that is self-generating and self-renewing. And again, the tremendous gratitude I have for the nonprofit as a whole, and also responsibility that has come from this, that I've recognized, is that we have the privilege to maintain that height without having to marginally grow production. Our responsibility is to marginally grow accessible content, like to show where is that edge, how do we take that risk. When we get to a place where we're comfortable, we take the risk for the next thing. Always. I mean, all farmers have to do that. That's nothing different, except that most farmers are taking a risk without the commitment of the rest of their community to accept that. And it becomes a gamble more than actual risk. And that's just something that we can't afford in our world. And it doesn't allow the concept of real organic to actually be perpetuated until we have good modeling for that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I like to think that Stone Barns is becoming an environment to be able to model where the edge is and where the innovation can happen, not to show people what's next, but to allow a place for people to come and sort of build that confidence as a consumer and as a chef and as a farmer and as a researcher, whatever angle, whatever stakeholder rule they come in at. They come into this place, and my hope, the best out of this place, is that they show and they're like, oh, I could actually do that. If they could stay here and do it with us for a while, they always get it. But if they just stop and see, it also does have some resonance.
It's interesting. So Stone Barns is got an economic cushion that many enterprises don't have. And with it, you're able to do things that many places don't. But I was so impressed yesterday when I participated in your learning circles as the 120 some people who are connected to Stone Barns were broken into small groups and going from learning center to learning center, and somebody was teaching what they do. And it's this very, very beautiful sharing with a group of people who are riveted. And what I saw was 120 people becoming what I would call biologically literate. And, you know, I know that that's what we need to do as a society. We go to school and we learn what we learn. By and large, we do not learn how to be biologically literate about agriculture. And for us to thrive and be healthy and maybe even be a working democracy, I'm beginning to see that it's getting bigger and bigger in terms of the impacts. We need to figure out how to teach and learn biological literacy, and I saw a pretty good model of it yesterday.
Thanks. I'm glad that you were here for that, because there are a couple of tenets that sort of came into this a few years ago when, pre-COVID even, when we were kind of at this place where we're like, all right, we've matured to this place as an organization. We have a team of people that are really excited about this stuff. The chefs and the farmers and the interaction that they're doing is really great. But then we have the rest of our staff still doesn't quite fully engage. They love the organization. They know what's happening. But isn't that just an example of the rest of our society? And some people get to experience these depths of maturation, and everybody else just sort of supports that.
Yeah.
No, that's not the society I would love to live in. It's where we are and what we are dealing with. But if we really want to dream and imagine what we could do when a question comes up, which it did several years ago when we were doing some, retreat work and doing some, work as an organization to figure out what was next for us. And this question kept coming up. I shouldn't laugh because it's a really important question. Who's your audience? Who's your audience? And it was just everybody ends up being the audience, but what comes around, especially for a food system, but you got to pick one and all this. So I just came around. There was just this moment where I was just like, all right, first of all, we're the audience. We're the audience. Let's start with that. And everything goes from there. If you feel like you're trying to figure out who the audience is and you're not included in that, then come in. That to me was the thing that we were missing most. For a farmer to feel like they're not participating in what this incredible food is coming out of the kitchen, or for this accounting manager to not feel like what they're contributing to in our CSA model or something isn't just as valuable as the farmer themselves in this space. Like, the reality is everybody's a contributor. And we all deserve to be the audience of our own work. And it's just an inclusivity thing. It's just, how do you get involved? It also has great benefits organizationally, because the reality is when everybody's really on board, now it's not so subjective. Everybody's speaking from their heart and speaking from their work. They're not memorizing the elevator speech.
Yes.
They're speaking about something that they love. And they speak to it from their position. And I don't need a new farmer to talk about the complexity of the crop rotations over so many years. I want them to talk about what they just did. Talk about how interesting it is that they were working in the sweet potatoes this afternoon, and or to say that someone in the catering group just really recognized that this food that was coming out of the field, they'd never thought about the seasonality of this thing because they just do different stuff in them. It's just a way of relationship. And that was a big one. That got us on this path of really making sure that, well, first of all, it gave us a minute to think about what it was that we were really doing that was really that special. Like, where are the sparks of interest? And what was interesting is that it was less about the naming of all the different vegetables and flowers and animals, and more about the synergy of the interactions between everybody. Like, what happens as farmers, we all know that those moments when we enter the back of the kitchen and everybody's really dealing with that thing there, or the chef or somebody from your community comes to the farm and gets out in the field with you. And then there's like these revelations that happen. They're micro. It's like micro epiphanies that happen because we're together and we're around something like, okay, you're the expert, but I just saw something. And that does this thing that is, we're just really at a loss for that kind of stuff in our world. And to your point, literacy, bioliteracy is a good way to talk about that. I think about too, as a farmer, as about my own maturity in nature. And I always tell my team, just because lots of people don't know about the moon or track the cosmos doesn't mean it doesn't have an effect on what's happening. And so you have the opportunity to pay attention to some of these things, watch how things grow, like observe those little secrets and feel how they change you. Those sort of things are important because what they're doing is they're giving you a relationship to nature. And I think really that connects to food, because I actually think that our society probably has this sort of 8-year-old relationship to nature.
Yeah.
Like we're kind of afraid of it. We like to be in it. It's beautiful and fun, but also we're not quite sure what happens when we touch it. And often it feels like we might break it. And so it takes a long time for me or you to be able to actually build the confidence in that relationship with soils and seasons and climate, especially when people are saying, well, we really wrecked this climate. It makes it feel like maybe you shouldn't touch it. But in fact, we know very well that the solution is in touching it properly and in touching it with intention and care. And the more that we get into that understanding, the more we'll mature in our food, because the reality is like food is like the last vestige of our relationship to nature.
Yeah.
So,
David Grinspoon talked about, I can't remember if he used the term or I did, but childhood's end. That as a species, if we are going to evolve and become kind of tenders of the planet, which we need to do in order to survive, that a more advanced society than ours would be recognized by its minimal energy use instead of its large footprint. And it came up because he was part of a group who was seeking to recognize intelligence in the universe. They were trying to connect with other species. And it was sort of a follow-up of Carl Sagan's efforts. And
yeah.
He said, we used to think we were looking for a planet with a large energy footprint. That's what we thought would be the hallmark of an advanced species. And we've come to realize that that's a small blip in the species survival, and either they end, and that's the end of that species story, or they learn how to do an advanced culture with very little energy.
Fred Kirschman always reminds me of Ernest Shusky's writing about the neocaloric.
Yes.
And just how short a moment of time that kind of energy use actually is, that we could actually sustain that kind of fossil energy is something we're doing. And then, what happens after that
Yeah.
it's sort of a make or break moment.
Yeah.
right, for us to actually regain that connection. But I think that kind of, what it comes down to is real mutualism. And that's how I look at agriculture and conservation and leisure, and like our relationship to parks and that sort of things. Like we have this sort of suburban landscaping thing, and then we have conservation, which is like protected and pickled, and then we have agriculture, which is extractive. And how we've dichotomized or trichotomized, or however you want to say it, was like broken it up into these segments of this is how we treat the planet. We either don't touch it, or we beat it up, or we just play on it. and that's not a combination of those things, and we can't find a way for those to interact. But we do see that. We see that now. We see an ecosystem and an ecology ahead of us that requires a mutual interaction. In order for us to be here, we have to touch it. And in fact, that's the sort of beauty of agriculture, is this this engagement in activating nature with us in it, and being able to take from it. But again, that requires that kind of maturation. It reminds me a little of Bill Plotkin, who writes all about human relation to nature and that kind of thing. Like once you get to a certain level, you can actually have a personal relationship to it. I think the farmers that are listening to this, and the other naturalists and ecologists that are listening, have that kind of thing. You're paying it. You're out there. You're in your space. It feels you. You feel it. We don't spend a lot of time talking about that, but to the extent that is actually one of the best mutually beneficial things that can happen from farming, especially diversified organic farm systems. The action of having that and the capacity for other people to engage in that, I think is just such extremely important stuff. Like yesterday in our conversation, we were talking a little bit about how important it is for, because how can everybody have access to organic food? How can everybody have access to this stuff? Well, that's a great question to ask. It'll probably take a long time to change fully. But what's really important is that everybody has contact with that kind of mutual agriculture relationship. That whether that's in a community garden or just growing a plant, it's getting beyond just like the human response, the human relationship, but getting connected to a place, getting connected to your food. When you lose that connection to the value of all this other stuff, we're sort of left wanting.
Yeah. So let me ask a few impossible questions. Like
the impossible question.
The impossible question. So where do we go from here? As we're trying to, we're in a time of great change, without a doubt, and a time of great, it feels like a time of great import for the future of our species. So one of the things that is fairly simple about organic farming is that many of us believe that this is the most direct path towards greater health for humans, is to eat good food. And that good food can only come from good agriculture. I just had a long conversation with Elliot and Dan, and we were talking about Doritos and things like that. Well, we all know, just about everybody knows, that Dorito isn't really very good for you. One of my concerns is that milk and beef and eggs and even berries and vegetables aren't necessarily what they once were. The most basic foodstuffs are changing invisibly before our eyes, and unless you dove into the food system and saw how they were produced, this would just be a mysterious idea. So you have a great bioliteracy, and you think about this a lot. What are your thoughts about where we go over the next 10 or 20 or 30 years?
Well, I think that there's a few different parallel paths that will happen. I think, there's this great, powerful thing at play, where I wonder if it's just the destiny of us as another species, as the planet's evolution, is that I wish we could see another planet that did something like we're doing right now. We might be like, hey, remember when they did that? We're right there. We just don't have that kind of context. But it's hard for me to think that we aren't in some natural cycle, as especially, like I said, this sort of destiny of all of our science and research and the depth of how deep we can see into something is like right in line with how much we're messing up the planet because we didn't see it. Like it's right there. There's this thing where it's like, okay, we saw what we've done to this planet over the past 7,500 years, right? I guess just this feeling is like, I'm not at this to win anything, I guess. Like, I just don't want to waste my time resenting all the things that are happening in this world around me that I don't think are right. I want to just be doing something positive, and I want to be able to motivate and encourage the people around me to also do that good. Whatever those things are, I want them to have hope and be able to generate goodness around them and in relation with the natural world that they're in. And just give it some respect and care and know that this isn't just for us to take everything, but like in some ways change your view of selfishness. Like it actually is in all of our benefits to be mutual, to be working in this thing and not to all of us be trying to win something, beat this thing.
Yeah, well said.
That would be great.
We need to encourage each other to be more selfish.
Yeah,
in a profound way.
It would be fantastic
Yeah.
if we really thought about what that means. Because it's just like, well, then it's obvious. We got work to do. We got great work to do, and we don't need to sell any of it. It's just sort of a thing that we're doing with each other. We're not taking sides. There's the same way as looking at agriculture. Look at what we've done. We've made everything our enemy. Everything's a pest or a disease or an invasive thing, and we have that, and we set it up for ourselves because that's the kind of competition we like to be in. We're in competition with the planet. The beauty of something like that, though, again, is that real competition would mean that we are together agreeing on something, which we're not.
Right.
We're not really. And, so I guess looking forward that we have a food system that can be grounded. And I always say that I think, the best way for that to happen is to actually physically immerse yourself and be a part of it. And that, though, is not everybody has the choice to do that right now.
Yeah.
So there's other things. It's like we have all these conversations with these great scientists and ecologists and researchers that have just amazing data about carbon and the microbiome and the relationship between soil health and animal health and plant health and human health and planetary health and consciousness and well-being and attitude and all these things that are associated to good health and good activity and well-being. So the through line for this, we've named it. How much more data do we need to agree to that? But the reality is, since people don't have direct experience with where their food comes from, or the way soil feels or smells or draws you to it, or how an early morning feels in nature, all of these things that we've just lost. The night sky, those connective moments. We actually rely a lot more on graphs and charts and data. So be it. So let's get some good data. Let's get some data out there that actually shows us that, that the number of fledgling bobolinks that can come out of a grassland actually is directly related to the incredible flavor and quality of that grass-fed beef you just ate. Like, you need long arc connections between nature, between the nutrition of what, and in many ways gives us a kind of reverence to that. So when the question comes up, are we supposed to eat beef? Or do we even need cows, or is it bad? We can answer the question by saying, what service is this animal doing in our ecosystem? And
Could you say that again? What service?
what service does this animal do
Yeah.
in nature? What does it do for us? And how are we respecting that? And how are we applying that? And I don't think it's a stretch personally to say that if we could answer that question, we might be a little more satisfied with eating beef. Because it does show, in many ways that when the systems are connected to each other, and this is how I'm seeing it, is that when systems are richer and more diverse and have complex, mature systems that are being managed by groups of people, they are resilient, they are highly productive, they're highly nutritious, they bring all sorts of joy, they're inclusive, they produce and generate their own kind of energy and fertilities. Why? To me, that's the kind of thing I would like if everybody were to realize that more. But I do have a sense that people are just going to hang on the data more than the experience of it.
Well, and there's this data and that data. I mean, what we see is that tell me what you want to prove, and I'll find some way of proving it.
Right.
I'm curious because what you just said is in such stark opposition to Secretary Vilsack's attack on the Farm to Fork program in the EU.
Yeah.
And he said, if we allow the world to go this way, we will all starve to death. I mean, he put it in such terms. And what you just said is if we don't follow that deep organic regenerative path, we're all going to starve to death.
That's right. And I would ask why anyone thought it was a good idea to set us up into this situation in the first place, in a kind of agricultural system that we knew was unsustainable. We have a lot of re-education and reconnecting to do that we probably don't have enough time for,
Yeah.
to be honest. But to say that, again, I guess that just goes back to, I'm immediately brought back to being 18 years old, 17 years old, and listening to one of my first teachers, Bud Smith in Rhode Island, who ran this large nursery that I worked at, Smith's. And all the old guys, all the old timers that ran this place, they were multi-generational. They grew vegetables and flowers and landscape plants. They did all the whole thing. Lots of open acreage and greenhouses, big, beautiful glass houses, and I was so proud to work there and to learn from them. But also, they were using lots of Peter's fertilizer and all that stuff, and so I kept asking, like, why? It seems like why wouldn't you use these natural methods, or use fish, or like, what do I know? But like, I grew up on an organic farm, and we were always making manure slurries and all sorts of different things, and old school kind of stuff. And they were like, yeah, well, those were the old days, kids. Like, we used to do that, but like, that's not how the future looks. Future's blue. You know what I mean? And I thought, this is pretty sad. And the reality was, all those guys died of brain aneurysms and MS and exposure.
Yeah.
And we were spraying stuff in greenhouses, and I've taped my arms and I've taped my face, and it's just no way to live. There's no way to eat.
Yeah.
And so, all right, Vilsack, I mean, maybe you're right, but is that the situation that we want to put ourselves in, to not try? Like, to fundamentally say that we'll all starve if we actually try to take care of this planet. I think that's pretty rough.
Yeah, that is rough. Okay, we should probably head towards closure, but I want to say that the three things that kind of land for me as the theme of what we've been talking about is connection, commitment, and community. 3 C's. And it seems like those things woven together create a foundation for us to stand on. So before I say goodbye, do you have anything final that you'd like to say, Jack?
Well, I would just say that it's the way we eat has a lot more to do with the health of this planet and ourselves than we probably think, because we've not been told everything we should know. We've not been educated in a way that is holistic and mutual, and we have to all take it upon ourselves to look deeper into it, and also just to find the joy in it, and to know that a future that is really sustainable is one that is delicious and beautiful and full of joy for ourselves. Because if it isn't, it's not sustainable. And I think that's not a bad way to judge what situations we're in. Whether it's when we're trying to navigate a diet, or choose food at a restaurant, or grow food in our own garden. Follow your heart.
Yeah. All right. Jack Algiere, thank you very much for talking today.
Dave Chapman, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you will subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review. A video version of this interview is found at realorganicproject.org/episode 82. Please join us next time when we'll be listening to a presentation that Elliot Coleman, Jack Algiere, and Dave Chapman gave to a crowd at the Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture last year. To support this podcast and our certified farms, become a recurring donor at realorganicproject.org, and you'll get the benefits of being a real friend, including our upcoming book club with Dan Barber, so you can ask some of our favorite authors all of your questions. See you next time.